another week has gone by, and we find ourselves in one of our favorite places, amongst friends, having a tipple. George is away, traveling. He has to pay the rent somehow, so I'm going to be in charge today. And we're joined by our good friend, Titch, in his place. And
should I be sitting there if I was taking George's place?
Well, yes, you should, but
I thought so.
Unfortunately, you know.
Oh, he's on a bit of a high. He's now a certified comrade.
Well, I've been a certified comrade since 2019. So I ran my first comrades in 2019.
Wow.
It was the up run from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, and last week I did the down run, the opposite direction.
What's your time?
11 hours 47.
Well done.
So you ran for 11 hours?
Well, technically, according to my Garmin, I only ran for about 8 hours 18. I walked the balance.
Well done.
Oh, good enough. Good enough.
Well
Good
done.
enough. Well done.
Yeah.
So now a certified comrade, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately for you, you're Zimbabwean. We're a country of comrades, so you're at home.
Absolutely.
Comrade Zengeni.
Yes. I am a comrade. Very proud to be.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So, comrade, lead the way.
Yeah, what you know, we have to start with
I'm having a Malawi shanty. It's spring. Spring is upon us. Spring has sprung, and this is the drink that will, get me through spring.
And the floral theme?
Exactly. Spring has sprung, so appropriately dressed. Unlike you gents.
Excuse me?
It's okay. It's okay. He deserves to wear a hat indoors. I think it's the comrades hat, so that's fair enough. But yeah.
Well, always in this particular corner, we have something much more interesting to drink. That's the Loch Lomond. We've actually had it previously on the show, but we didn't have. We had the poorer cousin, the 12-year-old.
Okay, fair enough.
But since I was feeling a little bit exuberant,
perhaps being a comrade is good for you.
we are having the more interesting version, the 18-year-old, which is matured in American oak and is non-chill filtered. So it's got all the flavors. It's not exactly cask strength, but it's halfway between what a normal whiskey and cask strength. And thankfully I get to share this with you, who's not given to adulterating these things with ice.
I wouldn't dare.
So
how come you never use the shot glass?
Well, firstly, because this is not a commercial bar. We're not trying to measure exact quantities of whiskey. And,
good answer.
We've been at this whiskey business for a minute.
Yes.
My hand is a bit more generous, but
these comrades.
So, Titch.
Cheers, Rufaro.
Cheers.
Thank you so much, and well done on running 90 kilometers. Wow.
Are you going to join me next year?
Look, I'd say the year after. I need to practice more.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, we're going to start off with Today in History. So, this week in 2007, the president decreed that there would be a ban on price increases. And we stood up the National Incomes and Pricing Commission, which, if you remember, was quite disastrous for us then. And what also came out this week is that the inflation print, month inflation improved, but year-on-year inflation deteriorated to 285%. So I'll start off with Tinashe. You've been tweeting a whole bunch about this. What can we learn from the inflation print? And is the outlook as bad as it was in 2007 when we started talking about banning price increases?
Okay, so those are two important questions, but let's start with the inflation rate. So ZimStats would have us believe that inflation is at 285%, but if you ask around, even around the table, a lot of people will tell you that actually their lived inflation rate is way above that, and especially the workers will tell you that inflation is way ahead of that. And when you look at the basket, I just did a cursory study of the basket that they use, and if you look at rentals, for example, rentals have increased by 254% according to ZimStats, but we all know that rentals are pegged in dollars, and the dollar is depreciated by over 500%. So one wonders whether the basket, or what we're getting from ZimStat, actually captures the real inflation rate that people are living under. None of the items in their basket is above 500%. I mean, things like university fees and correspondent fees, something termed correspondent fees, have actually just increased by 95% over the year.
In which currency, just so we're clear?
So this is Zim dollars. So So what it actually tells us, the meaning of the CPI is that workers, or the inflation rate, has been lagging behind the dollar depreciation. So we're better off. What the CPI is actually telling us is that as consumers, we're better off in Zimbabwe because our dollar has lost more value. Our Zim dollar has lost more than our prices have increased. I don't know if
but
that.
then who's carrying the pain? Typically, you'll find a food shortage or fuel shortage, and you know that that's where the pain is coming in. There's got to be somewhere in our system where the pain is.
But I want to push back a little bit on your criticism of the ZimStat figures, because if you focus on just the month-on-month change, for example, right, 12.5%, and you look at what's happened on the power market in the in the same period, it seems, they're in the same ballpark.
I don't know. Then you're making the wrong assumptions, right? And that's what we're trying to say. Is that first of all, we measure year-on-year inflation. So whenever we say inflation rate, we really look at the annual inflation rate. The month-on-month inflation rate is extremely volatile and does not really speak. It speaks to the direction. It's a useful number to analyze, but it's extremely volatile for us to make any serious judgment on it. But the year-on-year gives us an idea of how people have lived.
Yeah, so the year-on-year so the direction is it's actually got worse. It's gone up from 256 to 285. And we know that the official numbers are a lagging indicator.
So maybe I didn't make it clear, so I'm going to say it slowly so that you pick it up, what I'm trying to say.
Okay, please speak slowly.
I'm saying from August last year to August this year, the Zim dollar depreciation has been way higher than the prices have increased.
Sure.
So over the same period, consumer prices have increased, let's say, by 0.5 cent, and the depreciation has been at $1, at 1 cent.
And the conclusion is we're better off.
We are better off because our Zim dollar has lost more than the prices have increased.
So that's what
ZimStats is telling us.
That's
not our lived experience.
Fair enough.
Our lived experience is that actually the dollar depreciation has affected us the most, right? But ZimStat is actually telling us that actually that's not true. That's not entirely true. Prices have been increasing but at a slower rate than the dollar has been depreciating.
Yeah, sure.
I think Sony as...
No, I tend to agree with you, but what I'm saying is...
So is that true? Is that true?
I don't think that they're fudging the numbers. I just think that they're a lagging indicator.
Nobody said anything about fudging the numbers. Remember,
that's the opposite side of his mind speaking.
The ZimStat number is purely a proxy of what inflation is. It's not the actual inflation rate. And all we're saying is we need to contextualize the CPI from the ZimStats. That number, if that's the conclusion that you're reaching, that it's a lagging number, then perhaps inflation is going to be way higher. That's what you're saying. If you're saying it's it's a lagging number.
Yeah, I'm saying it's a lagging indicator.
Then inflation is likely to get to the 600%.
So I have an idea.
If it's a lagging, if you're correct.
If we can't trust these numbers, Rufaro, what is the most...
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we're critiquing.
Yes, but here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think you're onto something. Maybe we need additional indicators beyond CPI from ZimStat. Maybe something like the burger index, the MAC index. Maybe we need a chicken in index.
Yeah, you've got many of those.
You're being academic. I think that we have a fantastic indicator. People don't like to use it, particularly in official circles. But the power market rate is actually a fantastic indicator. Because that is
so what do we call it?
It's an yeah, well, you call it the black market rate, the power market rate, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
But it's a legitimate willing buyer, willing seller market. It's the only one of its kind in our country, notwithstanding the claims made about the auction and these other rates, which are clearly managed rates.
Okay.
So the power market tells us what's actually going on. In the last 30 days, it's actually retreated because there has been a shortage of Zim dollars because the government hasn't been making payments. And I think that's not sustainable. I think that's temporary.
Sure.
But I think that's as a snapshot of where we are at any given point in time, I think that the power market is the best indicator.
I disagree. I think that, and it's just unfortunate in Zimbabwe, and that we have to be a little bit more academic so that we capture the essence of what inflation rate is. I think that the power market rate is it's a good signal, but it's not necessarily our consumer price index, because there are certain goods in that basket that will not rise to the power market rate, will not increase or depreciate or in tandem with the power market rate. And it's very possible there are a number of things within that basket that may not. There are a number of things, for example, toll gates.
They've increased their prices just the other day.
Yeah, so there are a number of things, but there are a number of things. It could be farming, it could be tomatoes. For whatever reason,
Sure.
At a particular time we have excess tomatoes, so the price will be lower, and it won't track the power market rate.
Sure.
So that's why we do need a good indicator of what inflation is. So it's a good proxy, but I don't think it's the best proxy.
What is the best proxy?
So the best proxy will be money supply. So the best proxy of how much we've actually lost.
So you're Keynesian.
No, I'm not Keynesian at all.
You're talking money supply.
Do you want him to have a tantrum?
No. Absolutely. And I have no reason why. I don't even understand why you would even.
No, just listen to what you're saying.
Yeah, no. Those are monetary.
Let's get back to the conversation. And
inflation is always.
I want to stop you here because, in as much as I agree that money supply is a fantastic indicator, right? We have a small challenge in this part of the world in that
we don't get the number.
I mean, what's the latest number that we have? How many months old is that?
Absolutely, you're quite right. You are quite right. So that's why we, the Consumer Council used to give us a basket of goods, because I think that is also a good proxy for inflation, because they used to tell us that, well, this is how much you need to survive. This is how much a household needs to survive.
A family of six.
A family of six. And I think I would believe the consumer price, the Consumer Council, primarily because they're driven by protecting the consumer, right? ZimStats is driven, it's a government institution. So they have different ideas, or they have different, they're protecting different people, or they're trying to inform the public. But I think that we need as many proxies of inflation as possible, especially in high inflation. It could be the power market rate. I'm not saying I'm just saying it's not the best proxy.
So you mentioned payroll. What else? What are you mentioning?
So I say the Consumer Council, the basket of goods, the movement of the basket of goods.
That's equivalent to the MAC index.
Well, the MAC is not. The MAC
is just the MAC, but the consumer price
is a basket of goods.
Right,
and they would look at August last year and August this year.
Sure.
There is purchasing power parity, which you can calculate. We can all calculate. which really is a good proxy of inflation, which simply says how much money do you need in Zimbabwe compared to how much money do you need to spend in one of our trading partners like South Africa, and what has been the change between South Africa and Zimbabwe. But so these are all proxies. So the mistake...
Who's producing these proxies?
No, the Consumer Council is producing one. Many people are producing. For example, has a retailer price index that they have, and it was way above 200% in March. So I suspect that now theirs is closer to 400%.
Maybe it's come down.
No, it's impossible for any inflation number. It's almost impossible for any inflation number to have come down in August. Almost impossible. In fact, if it does or if it has, then that's one ingredient to know that we should not use it. So all I'm trying to say is, let's get away from the idea that the number that you're getting from ZimStats is the correct number. It is just one number that's trying to tell us what the inflation rate is, but there are many numbers.
Before we take the break, I want you to rate the ZimStats number on a scale of 0 to 10, as 10 being a perfect indicator of what inflation is, and 0 being absolutely useless.
They're probably 6.5.
Okay, interesting. And you?
I would rate them at 2.5, because we've only just started getting the ZimStat figures recently.
No, we've been getting them for a long time.
No. There was a period in time when the minister requested they stop issuing the figures.
Yeah, that's quite.
That was 2020.
Yeah, that's in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, sure, but in that entire process, I can assure you, they're working out a new formula, and that's what you're working with now.
What Musoni is getting at, perhaps not as lucidly as it should be, he's looking at the basket, which I think it's a fair criticism, that how relevant is the ZimStat basket today in 2022, where we have high inflation, and they're using the basket, the 2019 basket.
That's one.
So that's a good criticism.
In the year when they didn't
I don't think that they're a fail. 2.5, that's a fail. I don't think they're a fail. I think they're just above.
I can see the producer jumping up and down, and your makeup lady is beckoning. So we should take a break to allow Tinashe to powder his nose.
It makes sense.
And we can discuss exactly how good this whiskey is.
It's really good, actually.
Thank you.
We'll
be back shortly.
It's woody.
Hangi. Apana kana chikafu.
Hey, indlala, hey. Bazasibulala ngendlala wanhlaba.
Andikho wakubikile iko.
Asam.
Asabe.
Imugulibike makabeji.
Ngifuna usibulalisa ngendlala, eh?
Kwethe sekuru bayeza bayenyarazo bayathatha imali bayabuya kathesi nje so
Ngoyita kunyaraza.
wonke sekuru
The Sawira Connect card, connecting you to an easier and more convenient way to receive your funeral grocery allowance. Wipe away delays. Say goodbye to payment interruptions with just one simple swipe, 24/7. The Sawira Connect card, made for your convenience. Anytime, anywhere. Access made easy. For more information, connect with us today.
Welcome back. We were having an interesting discussion about inflation, the utility of the ZimStats number.
I think Comrades Marathon was more interesting than that. But anyway, take your pick.
And it occurred to me that what's missing from the discussion of the ZimStats number and the other proxies of inflation is the fact that the Zim dollar portion of our economy has actually shrunk significantly, and by far the larger portion of the Zim economy is actually the US dollar economy, and the prices in that space don't necessarily track US dollar inflation. So 24 months ago, for example, a room in a high density suburb, the rental went to as low as between $10 and $15 a month. And then, as the informal sector experienced some growth, they bounced back to more than $40 a month. And certainly in the last 3 to 6 months, as the impact of the war in Europe has filtered into the rest of the world, we have seen some US dollar inflation in the US dollar economy. But we never actually talk about that, whether the informal sector or the US dollar economy is experiencing inflation, and is that inflation important? Is it, are we missing something?
I think there's a reason why, as a driving learner, you're told to focus, right? For you to start talking about dollar inflation in Zimbabwe, it's actually missing the point. Our problem is Zim dollar inflation. And contrary to popular opinion that we shouldn't focus, that we have cash dollarized and we shouldn't focus on inflation, we should, because actually that's where government, so a lot of our pensions are not in US dollars.
Yeah, for sure.
In dollars, right? And people miss that our investments, all our investments and all our pensions are actually in Zim dollar. So they are affected by Zim dollar inflation. And then also, more importantly, government expenditure, which is inflationary at this particular point in time, is in Zim dollars. That's why we're interested in that. If you look at the US dollar inflation, I don't think it'll be more than 10%. And, 10%, I think it's actually less than 5%, if we're being honest. But I don't think that should be our focus. Our real focus, and the thing that we're worried about, that's affecting all our pensions, that's affecting all our savings, that's affecting the growth of this country, is the Zim dollar inflation.
But okay, let me push back a little bit and say that because the inflation in the Zim dollar space is so high, people are going to avoid transacting in Zim dollars to the extent that they can, and at some point there is going to be a wholesale rejection of Zim dollars if the trend continues, right? So are we not going to transition somewhere in the foreseeable future into a 100% US dollar economy because we're destroying the Zim dollar?
Two things that we need to consider. The first and most important one is Zim dollar inflation is affecting our pensions. So there's a whole savings industry that's going to be wiped out. And
that's been wiped out before. This is the second time.
And this is the third time that this is going to happen. So I think that we always say this, that the crime committed with high inflation, the victims are not today. The victims are probably 20, 30 years later.
It's us guys in retirement.
So while you are right that people will switch their current expenditure or consumption into dollars and will fully dollarize, but that comes at a big cost, and the cost is our savings. And if we've destroyed our savings, it means that even our GDP, the platform in which our GDP grows, is severely affected. So that's why we're worried about inflation. It's not because you can easily switch into dollars today, but it's because actually what's been happening over the last 10 years is you've been saving, and all those savings are just going to be wiped out. So that's why we're worried.
Let's segue a little bit into GDP. What sense do you get? You're an industrialist. You're on the ground transacting day to day. What sense do you get about what's happening with our economy? Do you get the sense that it's shrinking, it's just flat, or it's growing?
I think our economy is actually growing. The indicators are construction, the indicators are the number of young people that are going into schools at the tertiary level. Look, we'll come to that. This just took numbers for now. But it would be untrue to say that we're experiencing a good quality of growth. It's not. And I say so because, our largest clients are coming back to us buying more, but it's because, we feed into certain industries. And one of those is construction. And one of the biggest things that's happened because of this kind of a conversation is a lot of the pension funds are taking their money out of the accounts and putting it into land construction. And that's not because they really care for having apartments, but they think that having an apartment will give them security from the environment we're currently operating in. So to say
taking inference value from inflation.
Yes. And the reason we're still experiencing growth is because a lot of the decision makers have seen this happen before. And in the last instance, the solution was to just lend money, and it turned out to punish one community and reward another. So what we have now is an environment where there is growth, but it's very cautious because it's being driven by the decisions that people who are sitting on the pensions are taking today. And they're taking views that property, land, is probably where they should put their money.
So a few episodes ago, I was almost laughed off the show because there was a conversation around the banks that during the GNU, the bank loan books were $4 billion.
Yeah, of course.
Today, it's less than $1 billion. So how can you grow an economy without bank credit, without capital? So how is this growth happening?
It's because the banks are now playing in that very market. So what you find is you get a bank that says we've got a property development company. And that property development company does everything that you, Tinashe and I, should be doing for ourselves, but they're doing it for themselves. And that's why if you approach most banks and ask them for a loan so you can actually do what you need to create and to preserve value, they won't give it to you because they know how this environment will go next.
Do you agree, Tinashe? Do you think the economy is growing?
Because I totally disagree. I don't know which economy you're talking about. If we're talking about Zimbabwe,
why do you disagree?
Well, first of all, Zimra numbers are not keeping up with inflation. That's a big indicator that the economy is not growing.
But most of our economy is informal. It's not in Zimra.
So this, when you look at Zimra, you're considering what has been happening in Zimra over the last 10 years, where consistently they outperform inflation.
Of course.
This is the first time that they're actually not outperforming inflation. And we've gone through a period between 2018, 2019, where the economy, 2019, 2020, where the economy actually contracted by 16%, but Zimra numbers were still up above inflation. So this,
it's part of the lag.
So this gives you an indicator of just how bad the contraction is. That previously Zimra collections would keep up with inflation
and beat it.
Yep. But the economy.
But is it not possible that speaks to the shift of the economy from formal to informal?
Thank you.
No, I think
you just gave him his answer.
No. The first thing is you guys you're not even appreciating that argument.
No, I appreciate that argument.
Right. So first, if you appreciate that argument, then your argument would be how much of the economy has moved from informal to informal.
The other way around. From
formal to informal.
Yes.
Right. And if you look at how we calculate GDP, which, we shouldn't have this discussion around, us enlightened individuals. I expect this sort of conversations, Magab.
You're the economist. I'm just a 6-year-old.
When you consume, if you look at consumption, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at big brands like Simbisa, everybody consumes chicken in, formal chicken. Right, so we can calculate GDP just using purely consumption, right? And almost
can we though? I'll push back, but I'll let you make your point.
Almost 99% of consumption will at some point go through the formal market. Whether it's command agriculture, it's Vumvudza, it's consuming chicken in, it's consuming almost every gold panner or artisan gold miner who is not in any way formal, at some point is going to consume something. So we can actually calculate GDP using consumption. We can also calculate GDP using income. And we can calculate GDP using expenditure. So there are many ways in which we can test whether what you're saying is true. And what you're saying is only true as far as income is concerned. That perhaps we can't capture all the incomes that are in the formal market, especially those that are in the informal market, which is true. But do those people consume entirely outside of the formal market?
You make a very valid point, Tinashe. And I think
what percentage of their consumption is informal and is formal?
So that's less relevant, but what's more relevant, which I would throw back to you, is you now must argue that actually consumption has become so informal over the last year, right? It has become so informal over the last year that it's moving the needle.
It is.
That the entire economy is now hamstrung because everything is informal. Now, the mistake that you're making is we have three markets. Typically, we in economics, we consider three markets. The first market is the money market. And you guys are confusing the money market with the goods market. The goods market, while it may be informal, at some point it interacts with the formal market. That's why people like...
What was the third market?
The third market is the forex market.
Okay.
So we can also tell...
You sound like you're going down a rabbit hole. I want to push back on your initial claim. And the logic behind what you're saying is impeccable, right? But what I want to point out, which I suspect has happened over the last year, is that if you were formal business X, and you were selling your products in US dollars and in Zim dollars, the incentives over the last 12 months have driven you to, on the Zim dollars, on the US dollar side, if you have US dollar receipts and you're able to pay some suppliers with those US dollars, the incentives push you to account for all those transactions in Zim dollars at the official rate, in a way that was perhaps less true 18 months ago, 24 months ago. So when you look at the numbers, they look, so this is what I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to explain away why Zimra's numbers would underperform inflation, because you have more US dollar transactions in formal businesses being reported at the official rate, because that's what the incentives drive businesses to do. So they might actually be, in terms of units of product sold, in terms of the value, the real value of those units sold, there might actually be growth, but the numbers, especially if they're reported in Zim dollars at official rate, will show that there has been shrinkage. And this is what may explain Zimra reporting smaller numbers in an economy that's not actually shrinking.
Okay, so I think that's a fair criticism, right? The logic there is sound, but I think that's also in an disingenuous argument, because when we're talking about, you're looking at income, right? If you look at Zimra, where Zimra makes its money, Zimra makes its money from VAT, from that 2% transaction, right? And you might be in the informal sector, and yes, your income might not be coming from the formal sector, but at some point, let me give you an example. At some point, you're drinking milk from a formal business. At some point. Now, your argument only holds water if you argue by saying that in the last year, there's a significant portion of our country that is now consuming milk that is not in any way in the formal sector.
You've actually given me the answer I needed to give you, because when you think about value chains, there's a consumer, there's a supplier, there's a middleman, there's transporters. All of that is part of the value chain. Most of our value chain in this country has actually been outside of the country, not in the country. That's equivalent to informalization, because the impact is that money we're not seeing because it's going out. Secondly, I know a lot of people who spend their time and resources going out there to buy in downtown all the groceries that they used to go and pick and pay. How many people do you know who are doing home deliveries of the finest whiskey at the best prices today.
Ask me no questions, I'll tell you no lies.
Thank you. That's good enough for me. Now, what it says is to stock up a place like this, you can't walk into Pick and Pay. You're going to go and find a guy who knows a guy, and that's become the way.
So you know what's surprising with your arguments is your arguments.
Mine is different from his, by the way.
Yeah, it's different from the Msoni's argument. What's interesting is that your argument, to begin with, you're saying the economy is growing.
It is growing
because properties are going.
No, not that.
Because
I said population growth, and I said construction growth
is actually not growing as fast as it should.
Well, yes, what you're saying is that you're not doing your part, but Elon Musk is doing it for you. That's okay.
Okay, I think we need a break. We also have rentals to pay. We'll be back shortly. Hopefully, Mr. will be a bit more lucid.
At a funeral in the rural areas, there is a lot of work to be done. Fetching water, firewood, stones, bricks, and other things to save for Tonde. Tonde is sitting down where the elders are sitting. The young men are not happy with this because Tonde is the only one who knows everything that needs to be done. As the mourners wait for the body of the deceased that is still to come to the rural home, the elders are keeping him close and constantly consulting him.
Listen, guy. You see, among all these old men, nobody knows how your late brother's funeral policy works. Tonde here is a friend who works at Nyarazo. The friend is helping us with all the information, so we need Tonde close to us. You should be thanking Tonde because everything is circuiting nyore.
Neni Osekun, I just remembered that I have a friend at Nyarazo. Maybe I can help if Tonde can't find his phone.
Introducing Sawi, the chatbot from Nyarazo. Speak to Sawi for all your queries and inquiries. The benefits of having Sawi by your side are endless. When you need to know about our policy, Nyarazo products, payment platforms, claims, the Sawira International Plan, where to find the Nyarazo branches, Nyarazo contact details, how to apply, and any questions you may have. And she can help you find who you want to speak to. For your convenience, you can ask about anything, from our funeral services, counseling to your payments, and much more. Experience the benefit of having Sawi by your side. App Sawi today on WhatsApp number 0712 992 892. Nyarazo, Sawira Mukuru, Omgane Omkulu.
Welcome back. We're going to immediately segue into something that interests Tich and I. Tinashe not so much, but perhaps you will find it quite interesting as well. The Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, this week turned 92. This is a phenomenal investor, business person. Just to put it into perspective, if you placed $100 with Warren Buffett in 1965, today that $100 would be $3.6 million. He's done, so that return, it's 3 orders of magnitude more than the gold standard, which is the S&P 500. And this guy doesn't just make individual investments, he actually runs a conglomerate with more than 300 subsidiaries. Wow. So, I just thought it would be interesting because in Zimbabwe we're always talking about inflation, about how to ring-fence your value, about entrepreneurship and business, to just reflect on Warren Buffett for a little bit, and perhaps from your perspective, Tich, what are the lessons from this man's remarkable career over the last 60 years that are applicable to Zimbabweans?
I think the first thing Warren Buffett depicts is longevity. 1965, 2022, and he's still active. So he's played all the up markets, all the down markets. So number one is longevity. The second thing is he doesn't invest in things he doesn't understand. Warren Buffett could have made $100 convert to 3.6 million over the same time frame, but he didn't participate in tech. He's been a low-key participant. He hasn't really enjoyed it because he doesn't understand it. So for me, he's played the long game, and what he doesn't understand, he doesn't touch. And for me, those are extremely critical. And I, for one, have not touched Bitcoin. I've heard a lot of stories of people going,
so you don't understand it, so it doesn't make sense for you.
No, I'm not going to try it. I'd rather try something where I know I could tweak on the supply side, on the demand side. Yes, I can do that. But, you know, Warren Buffett just says, I'm not going to touch anything I don't understand. And that's why he's not in tech. But he's still there as the oracle. So, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity out there, but I think you've got to understand it before you put your money or someone else's money.
You have any comments? Apart from the fact that you don't particularly...
No. I mean, he's an interesting guy, but yeah, let's hear what you think. I'm not a Warren Buffett expert, so I'd rather not comment about things that I don't know.
There you go.
But you know, you love him? Maybe you.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I think he's a guy who operates on first principles. You know, he takes the basics very seriously. I mean, there's a book by the Intelligent Investor, Graham Bell. You know, he's a value investor. I'm not a fan of value investing myself, but I think he's demonstrated that over a long time. You can't go wrong investing in things that you understand, that are going to be up and running for decades.
Yes.
And to me also, I think what's interesting from a Zimbabwean perspective is that he's a counterfactual from our story over the since 1965 as a country, right? If you have good principles and you stick to them over a long period, you compound wealth, right? So so $100 would be 3.6 million, right? And if you look at Zim GDP since 1965, you look at the performance of our economy, they're exactly the same period.
It's more to the country of choice than to the individual.
Well, he's got businesses all over the world, or businesses that invest all over the world, right? Although he's
not investing in Zimbabwe,
but he's certainly on record saying he wouldn't touch Russia or Zimbabwe. but I think that because one of the central themes of his investment thesis is that you want to compound your investment over a long time. So even at a low interest rate of 2% per annum, right, if you compound it every year for a long enough period, the growth is exponential, right? And I think we are the counterfactual of that, where if you make policy, if you are practicing policy malpractice for long enough, you're going to hit that ground, right? So if you look at Zimbabwe between 1998 and 2008, we lost 60% of our GDP in real terms, which is remarkable for a country not at war. So I think maybe that's good reason for us to change course on a bunch of things, and we seem to be changing course on something that interests Tinashe, which is the way we pay suppliers. So we had a hiatus where we decided that we were being ripped off by suppliers, and we weren't paying suppliers, and now we've decided that some of them were ripping us off, and they need to review their prices. Earlier, before the show, you were very animated about this. Please.
You were more animated about this. You were more passionate about this than I was. But yeah, you're quite right. I think what's coming out are two thoughts, and I thought perhaps we need to zero in on these thoughts. There's the argument that contractors have been forward pricing, like double pricing, including hotels and the sort. And I just wanted to highlight that doesn't cause inflation. Just because that your supplier has increased the price does not increase inflation. And I give the example of you chaps that love drinking, that if you go into the Mikos, a beer will cost you double the price that you get elsewhere, right? Does it mean that
maybe 3 times as much?
Maybe 3 times as much. What it just means is what you will do is you will drink less. You will drink according to your pocket.
Okay.
It's simple, straightforward. Or you look for an alternative.
Yeah.
Or you just avoid the Mikos. You can't then walk into the Mikos, continue paying $5 beer, and then start complaining about Mikos and Mikos profiteering. You did Today in History, 2007. That's the last time we heard these noises of profiteering, that hotels are profiteering. I mean, honestly, let's be adults. Government has every reason to reject suppliers that they think have overpriced their products. They have every reason to look for alternatives. They have every reason to cut their expenditure.
Okay.
But I think that the real problem is they walk into the Mikos. The Mikos is very expensive, and they continue to pay Mikos. And once they're out of money, then they want to create a fight with the Mikos.
No, they just print, and then there's inflation. The real cause of inflation is the printing, and then what we are seeing now is a scapegoat argument to say, well, the problem is not that I printed an extra X
it's because amount the guy was overcharging,
and so it's disingenuous on another level as well, because if you think about market dynamics, okay, and if you're wearing the hat as a purchasing buyer, manager, director, whatever, right? Depending on how big you are in the market, you have more leverage than smaller players, okay? And it's difficult to imagine in our economy a buyer of anything that has more leverage than the government.
Agreed.
Because they definitely, as an institution, they are the biggest institution in town.
Yes, they are.
So if the three of us are trying to sell something to government and they don't like my price, they don't have to buy from me. They can go to Titch, they can go to Tinashe, and they can look beyond our borders if all of us are being mad and unreasonable. So this notion that everyone in Zimbabwe running a business is colluding to profiteer from the government, it doesn't hold water. It's really
it's a straw man argument.
It's a straw man argument. I agree with Tinashe. And so the problem is not how anybody is pricing anything. The problem is the printing.
Yeah. Inflationary expenditure.
But this is the problem where you have a government that is both regulator and player in the market. So at some stage, we need to draw a line between where government plays and where the private sector plays, because if the government, as it is now, the biggest buyer of everything in the country, we need to find a way of moving that power to the private sector. And without that, you've got a problem where they are the regulator, they are the buyer, they're the financier, etc.
So look, I tend to agree with your argument philosophically, but I think that that's not actually the problem, because if you look at
I tend to agree with
no, I agree with what he's saying philosophically.
Let me even cement it further.
No, but I want to make a different point, if you allow me, which is like, if you look at another part of the world from a development perspective that I admire, right, is Dubai, okay? And in that jurisdiction, the biggest player is also the regulator, but they're doing sensible things. And they don't have any of the problems that we have.
How much do they
I can answer that, and that's where I wanted to agree with Mzwani. And I think it was Fred Swanika who, really put it in a very nice and succinct way. He says government should do 3 things and only 3 things. They should make the law, they should ensure that people obey the law, and they should stay the hell out of it.
Yeah.
It's simple and straightforward. That's what governments should do.
Yeah.
And where I agree with Mzwani, where the government now is dabbling in the actual production, dabbling as a player, how do you stop the payments, right? We're talking about inflationary payments, but how do you stop government payments where government is the problem? From Vudza, for example, that's not a private sector problem. Kotco, for example, that's not a private sector. GMB, that's not a private sector. That's the government itself. And if the government was not involved, then it might be an impartial arbiter in a lot of those issues. Then they would really look at the pros and cons. But it's because they are a significant player in our market, they get in the way, they get themselves entangled, and you have this unusual factor that in Zimbabwe, you've got an overdraft facility. Government has a direct overdraft facility with the RBZ, up to 20% of last year's expenditure. Unusual.
This condonation bill.
And all these things. That's the problem that we have.
Actually, I would say different. I'd say they actually have an overdraft from all of us.
There's that too. So going back to the Middle East, if you really think about the Middle East, they look for investors. They literally go on a plane, go to the US, go to China, go everywhere, and they ask for investments. That's number one. Tourism. If you look at Dubai, for example, I think the
airport is the Dubai airport is the busiest aviation hub in the world. It's busier than Heathrow.
And why?
Sure about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Diamonds. Recently, they're now the world's largest diamond market. And it speaks to they're asking for money from other people. It's not inflationary.
And Dubai's the Emirati doesn't have oil, by the way.
Not anymore. That's the point. The point, it was 100% oil, but I think for like 15 or 20 years. And then beyond that, now it's tourism. If you imagine, just think about it. It means they're asking money from us, consumers. So you have an African man like yourself, Mzwani, with your children, you're out in Dubai.
Instead of Vic Falls or Zimra.
Why? It's because the government in Dubai is more amenable to Mzwani than the present government. If you look at tourism, tourism sector has suffered greatly. Our facilities are not up to scratch. Why?
Just listening to you, I feel like going to Dubai with my kids.
There we go. That's part of the problem. But I think it's and that's where I agree with you, that it's a mindset. Yeah, something, comrade, should run more comrades. That it's a mindset, because what you're saying is our government is extremely entitled. They want to spend our money and inflationary expenditure. Whereas governments everywhere else are looking out for new investors. Tourism is such a big thing. That's where their money is coming from.
But Zimbabwe is open for business.
Not taking away from savers.
Zimbabwe is open for business.
No, we're looking at. We're not even looking at. But what I want to
I was important. Okay, so recently I got a backpack from London, right? And it went through DHL. And apparently I haven't received it yet. You know why? Because for my backpack, which is a branded, logoed backpack, I need an import license from the Ministry of Industry and Trade and Commerce. So apparently I need an import license to import a backpack.
Was it a gift, or you paid for it and you're expecting it, etc.?
It's part of my course in London. So guess what? I have to.
So part of your education,
yes,
part of which will empower all of us, because you will become a better leader.
Enlightened. I may be as ignorant today, but one is hoping that I'll be less ignorant, and I need this.
Listen, I'm not quite sure what you're saying, but I hear you.
And it turns out it's just one backpack. I need a license. I need a license.
That is the antithesis.
And I need to apply for that license to get my backpack.
Can you do it online? And what info? Oh, jeez. You have to kill it some government.
I think I've put all the information online. Let's see what happens. But the process is, it was on DHL Express, right? Mm-hmm. You expect to get it the next day. Mm-hmm. It's now a week because of these delays, and I had to get an import license.
It's hilarious to me because I have a little bit of experience with these couriers, and if you're shipping to Zimbabwe, DHL or FedEx or these guys will tell you it will arrive here from the US, Australia, the other side of the world, literally in 1 to 4 days, and they execute on that timeline.
Yeah,
and then you will literally spend another week or two haggling with the institutions that need to clear it and release it after it's arrived to the airport here.
I know.
So are we open for business?
Look, I said we're open for business because that's what I heard.
No, I mean, come on.
Well, that panic is this business?
We're not open for business, but okay. Look, let's try to end on an optimistic note, right? I saw some literature making the case that the central bank has somehow picked up Tinashe's idea about a currency board.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about this? Are you delighted? Do you think this is going to happen? Or do you think this is just another?
It's advocacy, and advocacy. When you're advocating for something, you never stop. Mm-hmm. And for us, this is a lifelong journey. It's not something that we think will happen overnight. We're not under any misconception that it will just happen just like that. But I think that everybody must always advocate for something. This is something that we strongly believe in. Mm-hmm. So it comes to a hard budget rather than discretionary budget. The things that we're all discussing, we need to reform Treasury. We need to reform the central bank. I think that's the critical thing. That in the next coming years, it may not happen today or tomorrow, but certainly in the next 5 years, those are the things that we will be hitting hard on, that we need those reforms, and those reforms need to be real. I think that 2013 provided a good case for us to reform the central bank, but unfortunately I think it was too good to be true. At that time we had a dollarized economy and things were growing, so we didn't care much. And this is the point that we're trying to make, that let it be run by institutions, and it should never be about the central bank governor. Do you know who the central bank governor for the Bank of England is?
I have no idea. I know that the last guy was a Canadian.
It's actually ridiculous that we should know who Mangujka is. In any economy, the vendors shouldn't know who the governor is. In fact, they shouldn't know who the Ministry of Finance is. But why those two institutions dominate our economic lives is because they've taken so much from us. And all we're trying to do is to advocate for good institutions. That's all. So it's less about the idea, where the idea is coming from. Because I know that people get, really antsy about where the idea is coming from. It's not about where the idea is coming from. What is important are the principles, and the principles that we're talking about are the principles that will ensure that we actually have a future. So issues or titles.
We're going to have a future, man. That's a given. What's unknown, your future. What's unknown is whether you're going to like your future.
Well said. And I can see that. We don't know.
And on that note, we have to say goodbye. It's been a pleasure having you. We hope that we hear from you on our social media handles. have a great weekend. Please don't take us too seriously. We're just a bunch of friends having a tipple, pretending to solve the world's problems. Be good, and if you can't be good at it.